obratite pozornost na izlaze iz aviona. Iznad krila, 2 sprijeda i 2 strane.
Molim vas da zauzmete mjesta, počinjemo s radom. Možete zatvoriti vrata, molim vas, počinjemo s radom. We'll have to close the door, otherwise they won't enter. Zatvorite vrata, molim vas. Dame i gospodo, počinjemo sa drugom sesijom, sa drugim modulom. Nakon demografskih tema, trendova, šokova, optimizama i pesimizama, vi ćemo sada imati temu učinkovitost zdravstvenih sustava, što je, vjerujem, samo na izgled puno bliže prosječnom sudioniku ove konferencije. I naši izlagači, prezenteri ovog jutra su gospođa Valérie Moran, ona je iz Organizacije za ekonomsku suradnju i razvoj, OECD, gospodin Drummond iz Centra za ekonomiku zdravstva Sveučilišta u Yorku, gospodin Siniša Varga, direktor Hrvatskog zavoda za zdravstveno osiguranje i profesorica Stavljenić Rukavina, profesorica Medicinskog fakulteta i ministar zdravstva Republike Hrvatske u proteklom desetljeću. Ja bih molio da odmah počnemo s radom. Držimo se također tajminga, imamo jednu malu iznimku. Ovaj puta nemaju dame prednost, nažalost, nego gospodin Drummond ima 20 minuta. Svi ostali imaju po 15. Počinjemo i informirat ću vas 2 minute prije isteka vremena. Hvala. Please.
Thank you. So today I'm going to speak about the sustainability of health expenditure in OECD countries, which is quite a hot topic, not only there but also in Croatia. So a brief overview of what I'm going to speak about. Well, I will start by just explaining what we mean by the sustainability of health expenditure. I'll then show you what we're currently spending and what we have been spending over the past number of years. Recently, many countries have had to cut health spending, so I'll explain to you how many of them have done that. And then essential to any discussion of sustainability are the drivers of health expenditure. So I will discuss those and how they can be addressed. So in any discussion of the sustainability of health expenditure, it's first necessary to distinguish between economic sustainability and fiscal or financial sustainability. So by economic sustainability, we are concerned that the benefits of health expenditure exceed its opportunity cost. And by opportunity cost, we mean the benefits which could be realized if we were to invest that expenditure in other areas. So for example, in education. By fiscal sustainability, we are concerned that governments are able to raise sufficient revenue to fund current expenditures. So it's immediately obvious that the problem facing many developed health systems is one of fiscal unsustainability. So right now, many governments are finding it very difficult to finance current expenditure due to increasing unemployment, reduced economic growth. It's been difficult to raise the necessary taxation or social contributions. Of course, there remains a longer-term challenge of ensuring economic sustainability, but this requires a different agenda of policies, which is to ensure value for money. So what are we currently spending on health in OECD countries and also in Croatia? Well, on average, we're spending 9.5% of GDP, the majority of which is public expenditure. Of course, this varies quite a lot. So in the US, you can see they're spending almost 18% of GDP, while in some lower spending countries, expenditure is just over 6% of GDP. So for example, in Turkey and Mexico. Croatia is currently spending around 7.8% of GDP. So it's more than some OECD countries and just underneath the OECD average. What's interesting about Croatia is the high proportion of public expenditure. So that's quite higher than many OECD countries, and it's on a par with the OECD average. Now, from 2000 to 2009, the growth in health expenditure has been outpacing growth in GDP in all OECD countries, with the exception of Luxembourg. In Croatia, growth in health expenditure has broadly been on a par with growth in GDP, and so that's why it sits just on the line. So from 2000 to 2009, health expenditure has been growing by nearly 5% in real terms across OECD countries. However, in 2010, health expenditure grew by 0. There was no growth. And this is because of a fall in public expenditure. So on the graph, you can see that the broken line is public expenditure. In 2008, 2009, it was growing by over 5% per annum. But in 2010, it fell by 0.5%. So that really impacted on the growth of total health expenditure. So even though the economic crisis started in 2008, the cuts in health expenditure really began to take effect in 2010. And in particular, these cuts were quite dramatic in a number of countries on the left-hand side, such as Ireland, Iceland, Estonia, and Greece. But in Croatia also, you see there was a fall in health expenditure compared to a growth in 2000 to 2009. So how have countries achieved these cuts in expenditure? Well, in a number of ways. First of all, by changes to the prices of health inputs. Of course, pharmaceutical prices, which is very easy, I think, for many countries. But also health sector wages, and to perhaps a lesser extent, by also cutting employment. They have shifted costs to the private sector, primarily by increasing co-payments, and they have sought to increase efficiency, for example, by merging hospitals and other institutions, by increasing outpatient appointments and day surgery, and by centralizing the purchasing and procurement of healthcare services. Now, due to the rapid increases in health expenditure during the 2000s, the question has been asked about whether this expenditure could be used more efficiently. And so about 2 years ago, the economics department at the OECD undertook a study to examine the efficiency of healthcare systems in OECD countries. So the method they used was a method called data envelopment analysis, or DEA. And what this does is it constructs an efficiency frontier. And this frontier is comprised of the most efficient countries. So then all the other countries, or dots, which are lying underneath the frontier, can be said to be inefficient. And they are inefficient by the distance to the frontier. So you can measure inefficiency in terms of input inefficiency or output inefficiency. So what we mean by input inefficiency is whether there is scope to reduce inputs, such as health expenditure or the number of professionals, while keeping your outcomes or outputs, such as life expectancy, constant. In contrast, output inefficiency is concerned with whether you can keep your inputs constant but increase your outputs or outcomes. So the approach that the OECD study took was that of measuring outcome inefficiency. And so what they found was that in some countries, the gains from increased efficiency were potentially large. So they looked at whether you could keep health expenditure constant, but yet increase your outcomes in terms of life expectancy. So this chart shows the gains in life expectancy. The blue bars are the increase in life expectancy over 1997 to 2007. And the red dots are the potential gains in 2007, according to the DEA, keeping your expenditure constant. So what you can see there is that in about 1/3 of OECD countries, the increase in life expectancy achieved over the 10-year period 1997 to 2007 was less than what could potentially be achieved if you were to keep your health expenditure constant, according to the DEA. However, it is important to note that these results should be interpreted with some degree of caution. The DEA approach has many criticisms, and also the way in which the outputs of the health system are characterized are quite simplistic, because it is very difficult to measure the value added of health services. So while this approach is very useful and it does indicate there are some efficiency gains, it probably does exaggerate the extent of these gains. What the study also did was to group countries according to their health system characteristics. And so here it sought to move beyond the traditional beverage versus Bismarck characterization. So it took into account a lot of other factors, such as whether there was gatekeeping, the extent of private insurance, and a whole range of institutional factors. So it came up with 6 broad groups of countries. And when you look at efficiency across the groups, what you can see is that efficiency varies more within groups of countries than across them. So within each group, there are some countries which are performing very well in terms of the DEA analysis, but there are other countries which are performing not so well. So the main message you can take from this is that no one particular type of health system outperforms another.